The Forbidden Prison. Ethan Carter adjusted the controls of his old spaceship, the Odyssey, as it drifted through the vast darkness of space. His radar blinked with a strange signal, one that had been repeating for hours. It was weak, ancient, and almost forgotten. "Distress signal," Ethan muttered, tapping the screen. But from where? The signal was coming from a dead planet in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by asteroids and space debris. No one traveled here. No one lived here. And yet, something was calling for help. Ethan wasn't the kind to ignore an opportunity. He was a scavenger, a man who made a living finding things that others had left behind. If there was something valuable out there, he wanted it. As the Odyssey approached the source, Ethan's eyes widened. Floating in the cold void was a massive space station, silent, abandoned, and covered in thick, ancient chains that pulsed with a faint blue light. "This doesn't look like an ordinary prison," he muttered, studying the design. The station's structure was old, alien, and menacing. The metal was cracked, the outer walls scarred by energy blasts. Whoever had built this place had tried to make sure no one ever got out. Ethan hesitated. He had heard stories of the Forbidden Prison, a place where the galaxy's most dangerous criminals were locked away, forgotten by time. But no one knew if it was real. Until now. His ship's computer beeped. Life signs detected. "Impossible," Ethan whispered. Who could still be alive in a prison this ancient? He took a deep breath and activated his suit. His boots clanked against the cold metal floor as he stepped into the abandoned station. The air was stale, heavy with dust and silence. The walls were covered in strange symbols, warning signs in a language long forgotten. The deeper he went, the colder it became. Then he saw it. A massive chamber at the heart of the station. Chains covered the room, glowing with the same eerie blue light. And in the center, a figure stood frozen. Ethan's breath caught. It was not human. The creature was tall, over 7 feet, with armor-like skin that looked like stone. Its muscles were thick and powerful, its arms covered in ancient scars. But it was completely still. A deep voice suddenly echoed in the chamber, making Ethan jump. "Who disturbs my prison?" Ethan spun around, his heart pounding. But there was no one else. The voice had come from the statue-like figure. He stepped closer. The chains vibrated, energy crackling along their surface. Ethan could feel their power, a force designed to contain something unstoppable. "Are you alive?" Ethan whispered. The figure did not move, but the voice came again, softer this time. "You are not Vor." Ethan frowned. Vor. He had heard that name before. They were a brutal alien empire, known for their cruelty. He looked at the chains again. They were covered in small symbols, glowing faintly. His fingers brushed against them, and for a moment, he felt a strange warmth, as if the chains were reacting to his touch. Then, the station shook. The blue light flashed wildly, and suddenly, the chains snapped apart, shattering into dust. The frozen figure moved. Ethan took a step back, reaching for his blaster. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet refused to move. The creature's eyes opened, a deep, burning gold. It exhaled sharply, its body trembling as if waking from a long nightmare. Then it turned to Ethan. "You freed me," it said, its voice heavy with disbelief. Ethan swallowed hard. "I think so." The creature stared at him for a long moment. Then it knelt. Ethan's eyes widened. Why was this powerful being kneeling to him? Before he could ask, alarms blared across the station. Red lights flashed. A robotic voice spoke in an unknown language, but Ethan could guess what it meant. Something had been triggered. The creature looked up, his expression turning dark. "They are coming," he growled. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Who's coming?" The creature stood, his full height towering over Ethan. "The Vor," he said, "and they will kill us both." The station trembled violently, and Ethan knew he had just made a very big mistake. The awakening. The station trembled violently. Metal groaned, dust rained from the ceiling, and the cold, dead air was now filled with the sound of distant alarms. Ethan Carter's heart pounded like a war drum. His eyes flicked from the towering figure before him to the flashing red lights that pulsed across the chamber walls. He had just freed something ancient, something powerful, and now the whole station was reacting. The creature stood tall, shaking off the last remnants of his long imprisonment. His body was massive, built for war, and his golden eyes burned with something primal. But what shocked Ethan the most wasn't the creature's size or the deep scars that marked his stone-like skin. It was the way he looked at Ethan, as if Ethan was something impossible. Ethan swallowed. "You said, they are coming. Who are they?" The alien warrior didn't answer at first. He turned his head slightly, as if listening to something Ethan couldn't hear. Then his jaw tightened. "The Vor," he said, his deep voice filled with venom. "They never meant for me to leave." The name sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Vor, the ruling empire of this sector, ruthless, dominant, and feared across the galaxy. And if they had put this warrior in chains, what did that say about him? A warning klaxon blared across the halls. The AI of the station, still active despite the centuries, crackled to life with a cold, mechanical voice. "Containment breach detected. Reinforcement units en route. Estimated arrival 5 minutes." Ethan's blood ran cold. Reinforcement units. He didn't like the sound of that. The warrior turned to face him fully now. "We must leave," he said, stepping closer. Ethan instinctively took a step back. "Hold on a second. I don't even know who, what, you are. I just got here, and now you're saying the Vor are sending backup." The warrior's gaze flickered, studying him. Then his lips curled slightly, almost like a smirk. "You do not know what you have done," he said, "but you will soon." Then, with impossible speed, he reached out and grabbed Ethan by the arm. Ethan barely had time to protest before the warrior yanked him forward, as if he weighed nothing. They sprinted through the rusted corridors, past ancient doorways covered in dust and markings Ethan didn't recognize. "What the hell are we running from?" Ethan shouted, struggling to keep up. "They will arrive in warships," the warrior growled. "And if they find us here, they will not ask questions." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Great, just my luck." As they ran, he noticed something strange. The walls of the station, damaged, old, and worn, were suddenly pulsing with a faint blue light, almost as if the station itself was reacting to this warrior's freedom. He didn't have time to think about it, because the first explosion hit. A massive shockwave tore through the station's outer hull. The force sent Ethan flying into a nearby wall. Sparks rained down as an entire corridor collapsed behind them. The warrior, however, barely staggered, his body absorbing the impact like a machine. Ethan groaned, pushing himself up. What the hell was that? The warrior looked up, his eyes dark with recognition. Vor shock cannons. Ethan's stomach twisted. They were already here. Vor fleet detected. The AI's voice crackled again. Scanning. 4 warships. Heavy artillery locked onto station. Ethan clenched his fists. He had survived a lot of things in his life, but 4 Vor warships. That wasn't a battle. That was an execution. "We need to move," the warrior said, his tone sharp. "No kidding," Ethan muttered, gripping his wrist communicator. He tapped the emergency beacon to recall his ship. "The Odyssey is docked nearby," he said. "If we can get to it, we can get out of here." The warrior nodded, but his golden eyes held something unreadable. "You would risk your life. For me." Ethan blinked at him. "What? No, I'm risking my life for me." The warrior let out a deep, low chuckle. It was the first sign of amusement Ethan had seen from him. Then the ceiling exploded. A squad of Vor enforcers, armored, armed, and carrying plasma rifles, descended through the smoke. Their metallic boots hit the ground with heavy thuds. Their glowing red visors scanned the room. "Prisoner 001 has breached containment," one of them announced. "Terminate on sight." Ethan barely had time to duck before the first plasma blast fired. The warrior moved like lightning. One moment, he was beside Ethan. The next, he was tearing through the Vor soldiers like a storm. He didn't need a weapon. He was the weapon. His fists shattered armor. His strikes sent soldiers flying. The Vor barely had time to react before they were cut down with brutal efficiency. Ethan watched in shock. This wasn't just a warrior. This was a monster. And yet, he was fighting for him. Within moments, the Vor squad was nothing more than lifeless bodies on the floor. The warrior turned, his golden eyes locked onto Ethan. "We leave. Now." Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. Together, they ran toward the Odyssey, while above them, the Vor warships prepared to destroy the station entirely. And Ethan realized something terrifying. He had just become a part of something far bigger than himself. The hunters arrive. The Odyssey's engines roared to life, shaking as Ethan Carter frantically powered up the systems. The entire station trembled, its structure failing under the sheer force of the Vor bombardment. Red lights flickered, warning sirens blared, and chunks of metal broke away, spiraling into the void. Ethan's fingers flew across the controls, overriding the docking clamps that held his ship in place. Outside, the hulking silhouettes of 4 Vor warships loomed, their angular black hulls reflecting the eerie glow of the dying station. Their weapons glowed an ominous blue, charged for another strike. "Come on, come on." He barely had time to react before the cockpit door slammed open. The warrior, the being he had freed from the prison, stepped inside, his massive frame barely fitting in the small cabin. His golden eyes gleamed as he looked over the ship's interior, his expression unreadable. "You survived," Ethan panted, glancing back at him. "I saw those Vor guards. You tore through them like they were made of paper." The warrior simply grunted. They were weak. Ethan let out a nervous chuckle. "Great, fantastic. Now get in, because if you haven't noticed." Another explosion shook the station. "We're about to die." The warrior didn't hesitate. He moved with impossible speed, throwing himself into the co-pilot's seat with a natural ease that unsettled Ethan. It was like he had sat in a human ship before. A thought flickered through Ethan's mind. Who? No. What was he? But now wasn't the time for questions. Outside, swarms of Vor fighters detached from the warships, their sleek, black forms slicing through space like mechanical predators. Their weapons gleamed, locking onto the Odyssey. Ethan sucked in a sharp breath. Not good. The station's AI crackled weakly, its voice flickering in and out. Structural collapse imminent. Detonation in 90 seconds. Ethan didn't need more motivation. He slammed a fist on the thruster control. The Odyssey launched forward. The Vor ships reacted instantly. Their turrets spun, their cannons fired. Bright blue streaks of plasma sliced through the darkness, barely missing Ethan's ship as it swerved. "Shields holding," Ethan muttered, hands gripping the controls tightly. For now. Beside him, the warrior studied the situation with eerie calm. "You are skilled," he said. Ethan shot him a look. "If we live, I'll take that as a compliment." The Vor fighters closed in, their engines screaming as they fired. Ethan's ship dipped, rolled, and twisted, narrowly avoiding each blast. The station behind them buckled under the pressure. Explosion in 30 seconds. Ethan gritted his teeth. The Vor warships were positioned too close. If he timed this right. He flipped a switch, diverting all power to forward thrusters. "What are you doing?" the warrior demanded. "Just trust me," Ethan muttered. The Odyssey suddenly dove straight toward the crumbling station. Alarms blared. The Vor pilots hesitated. They weren't expecting this. Then, just as the Odyssey reached the collapsing structure, Ethan pulled up, hard. The Vor fighters, locked onto their target, followed. Station core failure. Detonation in -5, 4, 3. Ethan and the warrior barely had time to shield their eyes. The forbidden prison erupted in a massive explosion, an inferno of blue and white energy expanding outward like a dying star. The Vor fighters weren't fast enough. The shockwave engulfed them, their ships shattering into fire and metal. The blast knocked Ethan's ship sideways, sending it spiraling through space. Ethan struggled with the controls, fighting against the force. The Odyssey spun wildly, alarms blaring. "Come on, hold together," he growled. Then, strong hands gripped the controls beside him. Ethan turned in shock. The warrior, despite never having flown a human ship, instinctively steadied the ship. His fingers moved with the precision of a trained pilot, working in sync with Ethan. And for a moment, Ethan felt a strange realization. This wasn't just some ancient prisoner. Whoever this warrior was, he had experience. He had knowledge. And that made him even more dangerous. With their combined effort, the Odyssey leveled out, stabilizing just outside the blast radius. Ethan let out a heavy breath, resting his forehead against the console. Okay, that was too close. The warrior, however, was staring out the window, his expression unreadable. Ethan followed his gaze. The Vor warships. They had survived. And now, they were turning. Straight toward them. Ethan cursed under his breath. Of course they did. The Odyssey's scanners blared. Incoming transmission. Ethan hesitated, then tapped the console. A Vor commander appeared on the screen. A tall, armored figure with dark, expressionless eyes. His voice was calm, but dripping with menace. "Ethan Carter, you have made a grave mistake." Ethan forced a smirk. "Yeah, I make a lot of those." The commander's gaze flickered to the warrior beside him. "And you." He paused. Then, in a low, measured tone, he said, "Zyrakan, we have waited a long time for you." Ethan's head snapped toward the warrior. "Zyrakan." The warrior's fists clenched. His golden eyes burned with rage. "Wait," Ethan muttered. They know you." Zyrakan's jaw tightened. Then, in a voice filled with deep hatred, he whispered, "They are the ones who betrayed me." Ethan barely had time to react before the Vor commander spoke again. "Surrender the warrior to us, human, or we will burn you from the sky." Ethan exhaled slowly. He glanced at Zyrakan. The warrior, the ancient prisoner, the being Ethan had freed, was staring at the Vor warships with murder in his eyes. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "Yeah, that's gonna be a hard no." And with that, he cut the transmission. The Vor ships charged their weapons. And Ethan knew. The real fight was about to begin. A warrior's past. The Odyssey trembled as Ethan Carter pushed the thrusters to full power. The Vor warships loomed behind them, their weapons glowing with ominous blue energy. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared, flashing red lights reflecting off Ethan's tense face. "This is bad," he muttered, gripping the controls. "Really bad." Zyrakan, the warrior he had freed from the forbidden prison, sat beside him, his golden eyes fixed on the display screen. The Vor fleet was gaining on them, fast. "They will not let us leave," Zyrakan said, his voice calm but firm. Ethan shot him an incredulous look. "Yeah, no kidding. Any bright ideas, oh great space warrior?" Zyrakan's gaze didn't waver. "You should have given me to them." Ethan's fingers froze over the console. He turned to face Zyrakan fully. "Excuse me." Zyrakan leaned back in the co-pilot's seat, his massive arms crossed over his chest. The metal of his ancient armor gleamed under the cockpit lights. "If you had surrendered me, you would still be safe." Ethan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure. Because I totally trust genocidal alien warlords to keep their word." Zyrakan's golden eyes flickered at the words genocidal alien warlord, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned back toward the display. Outside, the warships had repositioned, forming a tight blockade ahead of them. Ethan clenched his jaw. They were hurting him, boxing him in. They weren't trying to destroy the Odyssey. They wanted Zarakan alive. Ethan inhaled sharply. All right, pal. Enough cryptic warrior nonsense. What the hell is going on? Why are they so desperate to get you back? Zarakan didn't respond at first. He simply stared at the vastness of space, the light of a distant sun reflecting against the cold hull of the Vor warships. For a moment, Ethan wasn't sure if he would answer at all. Then, finally, Zarakan exhaled. My people, he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of centuries, were once the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Ethan frowned. He had heard about the T-Care before. Stories, myths, legends. The T-Care were said to be an unstoppable force, feared, undefeated in battle. But then, suddenly, they were gone. Wiped from existence. Ethan leaned forward. What happened? Zarakan's jaw tightened. The Vor happened. Silence filled the cockpit. They came to us under the banner of peace, Zarakan continued. They spoke of alliance, of unity. We were warriors, but we were not conquerors. We wished to protect, not to rule. We believed their words. His fingers tightened into a fist. We were fools. Ethan's stomach twisted. He could already guess what had happened next. They struck when we were weakest. When our leaders gathered for peace talks, the Vor unleashed their fleet upon our worlds. His voice darkened, low and sharp like a blade. They did not seek war. They sought extermination. Ethan swallowed hard. But you survived. Zarakan nodded. I was a commander then, leading my warriors in the outer colonies. I rushed to defend our homeworld. But by the time I arrived, it was too late. The Odyssey rocked as another plasma blast streaked past them. The Vor were done waiting. Ethan rolled the ship, dodging the incoming fire, but he never took his eyes off Zarakan. What happened to you? Ethan pressed. Zarakan's golden eyes burned. I made them pay. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. The Vor had never faced warriors like us in direct combat, Zarakan continued. Without their deception, their cowardice, they were nothing. I led the survivors, struck at their fleets, burned their colonies in return. I gave them more. Ethan had no doubt that Zarakan had made good on that promise. But they had numbers, Zarakan said bitterly. And they had allies. The other races feared us. They saw the Vor's lies and believed them. They called me a monster, a war criminal. His lips curled into a smirk, but there was no humor in it. Ironic, is it not? The executioner of my people was given the title of savior while I was called the villain. Ethan exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. So, they captured you. Zarakan nodded. It took them years. They lured me into a trap, used my own kind. Tear prisoners I thought were dead. As bait, I walked into their prison, and they sealed it shut behind me. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The Vor had locked Zarakan away for centuries, hidden him from the galaxy, buried his past. And yet, the moment Ethan accidentally broke those chains, the Vor had arrived within minutes. They feared me then, Zarakan said, his voice almost amused. And they fear me still. Ethan took a slow breath. All right. Say I believe all that. What now? What's your plan? Zarakan leaned forward, his gaze dark and intense. They will not stop hunting me, he said. And now, by freeing me, you have made yourself a target. Ethan exhaled. Great, just what I always wanted. Zarakan smirked slightly. But you have something they do not. Ethan frowned. Oh yeah. And what's that? Zarakan's golden eyes gleamed. Me. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. Before he could respond, the Odyssey scanners blared. Massive energy signature detected. Ethan's eyes snapped to the screen. The Vor warships were pulling back, but not retreating. They were making room. Ethan's blood ran cold as a new ship emerged from hyperspace. It was massive, larger than anything Ethan had ever seen, an ultra-dreadnought from the Vor's most elite fleet, a ship designed not just for war, but for annihilation. Ethan let out a low whistle. That is a problem. Zarakan's gaze remained steady. No. Ethan turned to him. No. Zarakan stood, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for battle. This is an opportunity. Ethan blinked. For what? Zarakan turned to him, his golden eyes burning. To show them why they should have never let me live. War against a forgotten enemy. The Odyssey drifted in the shadow of the massive Vor dreadnought, its sleek black hull gleaming under the cold starlight. Ethan Carter stared at the monstrous vessel through the cockpit window, his heart hammering. That, he muttered, is the biggest damn ship I've ever seen. The Vor didn't build warships, they built weapons of extinction. And now one of those floating nightmares was staring him down. Beside him, Zarakan stood calm and unreadable, golden eyes fixed on the enemy vessel. The ancient warrior didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, he exhaled slowly. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. Okay, seriously, you're way too calm about this. That thing could swallow us whole. What's the plan? Zarakan turned, his expression unreadable. We do what warriors do. Ethan blinked. Which is? Zarakan's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. We fight. Before Ethan could respond, the ship's comm unit crackled to life. Human vessel. This is High Commander Vorex of the Vor Dominion. You are in violation of intergalactic law. Surrender the fugitive, and you will be allowed to leave unharmed. Ethan snorted. Yeah. Because the Vor are known for keeping their word. You have 60 seconds to comply. Zarakan's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained locked on the screen. Ethan exhaled and tapped the ship's controls. Let me guess, you're not in the mood for surrender. Zarakan simply folded his arms. Are you? Ethan grinned despite himself. Not a chance. The Vor make their move. The 60 seconds passed. The Vor opened fire. The first energy blast barely missed, searing past the Odyssey as Ethan yanked the controls hard, sending the ship into a wild roll. Shields at 60%. The ship's eye warned. Zarakan didn't look impressed. We won't last long in open combat. Ethan gritted his teeth. Then we don't fight fair. He twisted the ship, diving straight into an asteroid field that orbited the nearby dead planet. Giant rocks floated aimlessly in space, some as large as battleships, others no bigger than his hand. The Vor fighters followed, sleek black forms weaving through the debris like hunting birds. Ethan's fingers flew over the controls. Come on, come on. A red alarm flashed. Lock-on detected. A missile launched, streaking toward them. Zarakan moved fast. His massive hand slammed a button on the panel. A countermeasure drone shot out, colliding with the missile mid-flight. Boom. Ethan whistled. Okay, you do know a thing or two about ships. Zarakan didn't respond. His focus was on the Vor fighters closing in. Too many of them. Ethan clenched his jaw. They needed an edge. Then he saw it, an abandoned Vor outpost, buried within the asteroid belt. His mind raced. Vor stations meant Vor weapons. A grin spread across Ethan's face. I think I just found us a game changer. The outpost gambit. He yanked the ship toward the abandoned outpost, weaving between asteroids. The Vor fighters hesitated for a fraction of a second. Just enough. Ethan landed hard on the rocky surface. We need to move. Now. Zarakan was already ahead of him, leaping out of the ship with terrifying agility. Ethan scrambled after him, blaster in hand. Inside, the outpost was dark and silent, a relic from an era long past. But Vor technology was stubborn. Even abandoned, it still had power. Zarakan approached an inactive weapons console, his golden eyes narrowing as he studied the system. Ethan cocked an eyebrow. Tell me you can make this thing work. Zyrakan pressed his palm against the console. The ancient Vor systems recognized him immediately. Welcome, Commander. Ethan's jaw nearly hit the floor. Zyrakan smirked. They never expected me to return. The station roared to life. Old but deadly defense turrets emerged from the ground. The Vor fighters above, unaware of what was happening, continued their pursuit until the first turret locked on. Boom! The first fighter exploded. Another followed. The Vor suddenly realized their mistake. Ethan whooped, clapping Zyrakan on the back. Remind me never to bet against you. The Vor dreadnought, watching from orbit, adjusted its approach. Zyrakan's expression darkened. They will retaliate soon. Ethan exhaled. Then we hit first. He pulled up a map of the outpost's weapon systems, and then his heart stopped. A planetary-class railgun. It was old, barely functional, but it was still there, and it was pointed directly at the Vor warship. Zyrakan noticed it at the same time. He turned to Ethan, his golden eyes filled with something Ethan had never seen before. Respect. You have the heart of a warrior, Zyrakan said. Ethan grinned, more like the brain of a guy who really hates being outgunned. The battle begins. The Vor had regrouped. Fighters swarmed above, and the dreadnought's cannons charged for another blast. Ethan cracked his knuckles. You ever fire one of these things? Zyrakan smirked. Not in a long time. The railgun hummed to life, energy building. The Vor realized too late what was happening. They had walked into a trap. Target locked, the console chimed. Ethan slammed his hand onto the trigger. A deafening blast shook the outpost as the railgun fired. The projectile ripped through space like a comet, slamming into the Vor dreadnought's side. Boom! The shockwave was massive, sending fighters spiraling out of control. The Vor flagship lurched violently, explosions tearing through its hull. Ethan pumped his fist. Direct hit. The dreadnought, however, was still operational, but barely. Zyrakan stood tall, watching the battle unfold. His eyes were filled with something new, a fire that had been long extinguished. We have won this battle, he said, but the war is not over. Ethan exhaled. Yeah, I figured you were gonna say that. Zyrakan turned to him, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. The Vor now know you are more than just a scavenger. You are a warrior. Ethan smirked. If I stick with you, I'm gonna need to be. The Vor began to retreat, their warship damaged but not destroyed. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The final stand. The Vor dreadnought limped away, damaged but not destroyed. Its hull was still glowing from the railgun strike, molten metal peeling away into space. Smaller Vor fighters scattered, retreating to their mothership like wounded predators. Ethan Carter exhaled, still gripping the railgun controls. His heart pounded, adrenaline burning through his veins. Did we just? He swallowed hard. Did we just make a Vor warship run? Zyrakan stood beside him, his golden eyes locked on the distant vessel. His expression was unreadable, but his fists were clenched at his sides. No, he said finally. They are not running. Ethan's stomach twisted. What do you mean? They're literally leaving. Zyrakan turned to him, his gaze heavy with experience. The Vor never run. They reposition. A deep sense of unease crept into Ethan's chest. He looked back at the ship, now disappearing into the void. Then, the Odyssey's long-range scanners blared. Incoming energy spike detected. Ethan frowned and checked the readings. His blood ran cold. No way. He ran the calculations again. That's. The realization hit him like a hammer. They're calling for reinforcements. Zyrakan nodded grimly. And the Vor do not call for help unless they are certain of victory. Ethan slammed his fist on the console. Damn it. They had barely survived that last fight. His ship was running low on fuel, the outpost was an abandoned wreck, and the Vor had a fleet inbound. They weren't just trying to capture Zirakan anymore. They were coming to erase them. A desperate plan. Ethan rubbed his temples. All right. Think, Carter. Think. They had one railgun shot left before the outpost's power reserves were gone. The Odyssey's shields were at 40%, and they had no time to escape before the Vor returned. We can't fight an entire fleet, Ethan muttered. Even you can't punch that many ships to death. Zirakan smirked slightly. I have not tried. Ethan shot him a look. Don't tempt me. The console beeped again. Ethan frowned as a second signal appeared on the scanners. Not Vor. Something else. Unidentified ship detected. Inbound at high velocity. Zirakan's expression darkened. That is not Vor technology. Ethan quickly pulled up the data. The ship was small, fast, cloaked, and headed straight for them. His stomach sank. We're about to have company. A ghost from the past. The mystery ship came out of warp in a flash, its sleek black form barely visible against the darkness of space. It wasn't Vortech. It was something older. Something dangerous. Before Ethan could react, the ship's weapons locked onto the Odyssey. Then, an incoming transmission. Zirakan. The voice was sharp, cold, and full of hatred. Zirakan's jaw tightened. His fists clenched. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Friend of yours. Zirakan exhaled. Not anymore. The comms crackled, and the voice spoke again. You should have stayed buried. Without warning, the mystery ship opened fire. A pulse cannon blast slammed into the Odyssey, shaking the entire ship. The shields flickered dangerously. Ethan yanked the controls, dodging a second blast. Okay, that's not very friendly. Zirakan was already moving. He stormed toward the weapons console, activating the few remaining turret defenses. Ethan swerved the ship, dodging between asteroids. Whoever was piloting that ship was fast, almost inhumanly fast. Who is this guy? Ethan demanded. Zirakan's voice was grim. His name is Calvar. He was once my brother. Ethan choked. Excuse me, you're what? Zirakan didn't take his eyes off the battle. The Vor destroyed my people, but some of us were given a choice, serve or die. His golden eyes darkened. Calvar chose to serve. Ethan's stomach twisted. And let me guess, now he's here to finish what the Vor started. A direct hit rocked the Odyssey. Sparks exploded from the controls. Ethan cursed, rerouting power. Shields at 20%. Calvar's ship circled them like a predator, dodging every counterattack with impossible speed. Ethan clenched his jaw. They weren't going to win this dogfight. He turned to Zirakan. We need a new plan. Fast. Zirakan's gaze flicked to the outpost, then back to Calvar's ship. A slow smile spread across his face. We lure him inside, he said. Ethan blinked. Inside the outpost. That place is falling apart. Zirakan's eyes gleamed. Exactly. The trap. Ethan didn't like the plan, but he liked getting blown up by Calvar even less. With a deep breath, he killed the Odyssey's thrusters, making it look like they were powering down. Calvar's ship slowed, scanning them. Weak, the comms crackled. You were always weak. Ethan gritted his teeth. Man, your brother's a real piece of work. Zirakan said nothing. Calvar's ship moved in, ready to finish them off. Then, Ethan slammed the controls, pushing the Odyssey into a hard dive toward the outpost. Calvar followed. The chase was on. The betrayal. Inside the crumbling outpost, Ethan dodged between rusted corridors, threading the Odyssey through narrow tunnels. Calvar was right behind them, weapons primed. Ethan's hands sweated against the controls. One wrong move, and they were dead. Then, the station AI activated. Warning. Structural collapse imminent. Calvar realized too late. The walls caved in behind him, cutting off his escape. He was trapped. Zirakan stood, his expression calm. Now, brother. Ethan hit the final detonation sequence. Boom! The outpost exploded from within, fire and metal tearing Kalvar's ship apart. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the wreckage of Kalvar's ship floated lifelessly in space. Ethan let out a slow breath. Is it over? Zirakan's eyes never left the debris. No. Ethan's stomach sank. He's still alive, isn't he? Zirakan nodded. And next time, he will not be alone. Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. Great, just what I needed. The Vor fleet was still coming. Kalvar was still alive. And now, Ethan Carter was officially in the middle of a galactic war. He turned to Zirakan. You owe me a damn drink after this. Zirakan smirked. Agreed. The legend reborn. The vastness of space stretched endlessly around them, but Ethan Carter couldn't shake the weight pressing down on his chest. His ship, the Odyssey, drifted among the shattered debris of the Vor outpost, its hull battered but intact. The wreckage of Kalvar's ship floated nearby, but deep in his gut, Ethan knew this wasn't over. Beside him, Zirakan stood silent, his golden eyes scanning the void. His hands, powerful and scared, rested on the console, his fingers occasionally tapping against the metal, a habit Ethan had come to recognize as anticipation. Ethan exhaled slowly. All right, big guy, you want to tell me what's next? Because I'm guessing we're not just gonna cruise out of here and retire on some tropical moon. Zirakan didn't look at him. Instead, he reached forward and pressed a single button on the console. A holographic projection flickered to life, a live feed of the Vor fleet. Ethan's heart dropped. The warships hadn't retreated. They had regrouped. A new fleet had arrived, larger, deadlier. Warships bristling with planetary-class weapons now surrounded the sector, blotting out the stars like a mechanical storm. In the center of them all, a Vor flagship unlike any Ethan had ever seen loomed like a titan. Zirakan's jaw tightened. Project Revenant. Ethan frowned. That's the second time you've said that. Mind filling me in? Zirakan's golden gaze burned. It is the Vor's last resort. Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. Fantastic. And I suppose this last resort is aimed at us. Zirakan nodded. The Vor do not simply wish to kill me. They wish to erase me. His voice was cold, distant. And now, you as well. Ethan clenched his jaw. Okay. Well, not a fan of that plan. So, what do we do? Zirakan turned to him, eyes blazing. We take the fight to them. Ethan froze. I was afraid you'd say that. The Vor's trap. The Vor transmission crackled across the cockpit. Human vessel. This is Supreme Commander Vorex. You are surrounded. Surrender the fugitive, and your life will be spared. Ethan smirked. Yeah, I've heard this speech before. He cut the transmission. Zirakan stood. The Vor do not expect resistance. They believe we are already dead. Ethan exhaled. Guess we should make them work for it. Zirakan moved to the weapons bay, grabbing what looked like a massive Vor-forged battle spear. The metal hummed with residual energy, a relic from an ancient war. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're really gonna bring a stick to a fleet battle? Zirakan smirked. It is not a stick. Ethan shook his head. You know what? Fine. You do your warrior thing. I'll try not to get us killed. He powered up the Odyssey's weapons and diverted every ounce of remaining energy to shields and thrusters. Then the Vor fleet moved in. The last battle begins. The first barrage hit like a meteor storm. The Odyssey spun through the chaos, dodging as much fire as Ethan's reflexes allowed. The Vor didn't want to destroy the ship outright. They wanted Zirakan, which meant Ethan had one advantage: time. He yanked the controls hard left, plunging the Odyssey straight toward the flagship. Zirakan braced himself. What are you doing? Ethan grinned. Giving you a front row seat. The Vor flagship loomed ahead. Its massive hangar doors began to open. Ethan saw his opportunity. He cut the engines entirely. The Odyssey drifted. The Vor warships overshot their targets. And in that split second of confusion, Ethan reactivated the thrusters at full burn, launching directly inside the enemy hangar. Infiltrating the flyship, the Odyssey crashed down inside the massive Vor hangar bay, skidding across the metal floor as alarms blared. Vor guards swarmed, weapons drawn, ready to engage. But Zarakan was already moving. Before the ship had even fully stopped, he launched forward, his massive form moving with unnatural speed. His battle spear ripped through Vor armor like paper. Ethan barely had time to grab his blaster before the body started falling. Zarakan was a force of nature. Guards fell. Turrets were ripped from the walls. Ethan, breathless, ducked behind a crate. "Remind me never to piss you off." Zarakan didn't answer. He was already moving toward the command bridge. The Vor feared him. But this time, they weren't running. They were waiting. The true purpose of Project Revenant, Ethan and Zarakan fought their way to the command deck. The doors burst open, revealing a dark, cathedral-like chamber filled with Vor commanders. And at the center, Kalvar, alive, waiting. Ethan's pulse spiked. Oh, hell no. Kalvar turned, his gaze locking onto Zarakan. "Brother." Zarakan stepped forward, muscles tensed, golden eyes burning with rage. "I should have finished you when I had the chance." Kalvar smirked. "You never had the chance." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Okay, I feel like we're missing some important context here." Then, Ethan saw it. The true purpose of Project Revenant. A cloning chamber. Rows of suspended bodies, identical to Zarakan, floating in containment tubes. Dozens of them. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Oh, shit." Kalvar turned to Zarakan. "They didn't just fear you, brother." He gestured to the clones. "They wanted to control you." Ethan's stomach twisted. The Vor hadn't just imprisoned Zarakan. They had been trying to recreate him. Zarakan's breathing slowed. His hands trembled at his sides. Ethan saw something in his eyes he had never seen before. Doubt. Kalvar smirked. "And now, the Vor do not need you anymore." Ethan's mind raced. This was a trap. A way to break Zarakan before the fight had even begun. And for the first time, it was working. Ethan stepped forward. "Hey, big guy, you listening?" Zarakan didn't move. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't care how many copies they make. There's only one Zarakan." Silence. Then, Zarakan's eyes blazed. Kalvar took a step back. No. Zarakan moved. Lightning fast. His battle spear sliced through the cloning chambers, shattering them. The room erupted into chaos. And in that moment, Ethan knew. The Vor had spent centuries fearing Zarakan. They were about to learn why. The last war. The cloning chambers shattered, glass and biofluid spilling onto the floor. The metallic scent of machinery mixed with something colder, something Ethan Carter couldn't quite name. Zarakan stood in the wreckage, breathing heavily, his golden eyes burning with rage. He had spent centuries imprisoned, thinking he was the last of his kind. Now he knew the truth. The Vor hadn't just feared him. They had tried to replace him, and Kalvar had been the key to their plan. Ethan's fingers tensed around his blaster as he turned to the traitorous T-Care standing in front of them. Kalvar was calm, his dark, battle-worn armor gleaming under the flickering red lights of the command bridge. "You don't understand, brother," Kalvar said smoothly, stepping forward. "I gave us a future." Zarakan gripped his battle spear tighter. "You betrayed everything we stood for." Kalvar sighed. "And yet I am the only reason the Vor allowed the T-Care to live." Ethan scoffed. "Yeah, real generous of them. Too bad they were just making copies of your future." Kalvar's cold gaze flicked to Ethan. "And yet here you stand, fighting for something you do not even understand." Ethan rolled his eyes. Buddy, I gave up on understanding this mess a long time ago. I'm just here to make sure my friend doesn't die today. Kalavar smirked. Then you are already too late. The flagship trembled. Outside, the Vor fleet had fully engaged. Waves of warships surrounded the command vessel, their super weapons charging. Zyrakan's jaw tightened. They intend to wipe this sector from existence. Kalavar nodded. And after you fall, they will take their new army, your clones, and bring order to the galaxy. Ethan exhaled sharply. That was their plan. The Vor hadn't just wanted Zyrakan dead. They wanted to build an army of him. And now, Ethan and Zyrakan were standing in the middle of a death trap. The final battle begins. Kalavar moved first. One moment, he was standing still. The next, he was lunging. His energy blade ignited, crackling with golden light as it slashed toward Zyrakan. Zyrakan blocked just in time, his battle spear clashing with the blade, sending a shockwave through the room. Sparks exploded as the force of their battle sent debris flying. Ethan dove for cover, blasting at Vor soldiers pouring into the bridge. Zyrakan and Kalavar clashed like titans. Spears and blades, strength against strength, a warrior against his own blood. Kalavar fought with precision, deadly, and controlled. He had trained under the Vor for years. He knew their strategies, their weapons. But Zyrakan was fury incarnate. His spear shattered Kalavar's defenses, forcing the traitor backward. Ethan saw his chance. He leaped from behind a console, aiming for Kalavar's exposed flank. But Kalavar was faster. A pulse of energy threw Ethan across the room, slamming him into a control panel. He gasped, his vision swimming. Kalavar turned back to Zyrakan. You're strong, brother, but the Vor made me stronger. With inhuman speed, Kalavar grabbed Zyrakan's spear and snapped it in half. Zyrakan staggered back, his weapon ruined. Kalavar pressed forward, swinging his blade in a final deadly arc. Ethan saw only one option. He fired. A single shot pierced Kalavar's side, cutting through his armor. Kalavar stiffened, his attack faltering for a second. But a second was all Zyrakan needed. With a roar, Zyrakan drove his fist into Kalavar's chest, sending him crashing through the command bridge's control panel. Kalavar coughed, gripping his wound, staring up at his brother. For the first time, his confidence wavered. Zyrakan loomed over him. This is the future you chose, he said, voice low, final. Kalavar gritted his teeth. You can't stop them. Zyrakan tilted his head. Watch me. Then, he drove Kalavar's own blade into his chest. Kalavar gasped. A moment later, he was still. Zyrakan exhaled, stepping back. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Well, that happened. Then, the entire ship trembled violently. The Vor fleet's super weapons were primed. Ethan scrambled to the control panel. Big guy. We still have a slight problem. Zyrakan turned to the central console, where a blinking red screen showed the Vor's final countdown. They had minutes before the fleet unleashed enough firepower to vaporize the entire system. Ethan cursed. I don't suppose this ship has a don't explode button. Zyrakan's golden eyes flickered. Then he walked to the command interface. Ethan frowned. What are you? Zyrakan placed his hand on the Vor console. Override. Takara, Alpha Protocol. Ethan's jaw dropped. Excuse me, what? Zyrakan's voice was firm. They built this fleet using the bones of my people. The console flashed. Access granted. The entire Vor fleet systems began shutting down. Ethan stared. You could do that this whole time. Zyrakan's smirk was subtle. Only when I was ready. Ethan exhaled. You know what? I don't even care. Let's just get out of here. The Odyssey powered up, breaking away from the Vor flagship just as explosions erupted behind them. The Vor fleet, now without control, began to turn on itself. By the time they entered hyperspace, the Vor fleet was no longer a threat. The legend lives on. The Odyssey drifted through the quiet of deep space. Ethan leaned back in his chair, still processing everything. "You know," he said finally, "I was just supposed to salvage some old junk. Not get involved in an intergalactic war." Zyrakan chuckled. "And yet, here you stand." Ethan smirked. "Guess I do." He turned to Zyrakan. "So, what now?" Zyrakan looked out into the void. "The Vor are weakened, but they will rebuild." His golden eyes glowed. "And this time, they will know that I am waiting." Ethan sighed. "Yeah, somehow, I knew you were gonna say that." He held out his hand. Zyrakan looked at it. Then, after a moment, he shook it. And just like that, a legend was reborn. The end.